Much like the character I named this channel after, I never hated the buggers, but then they brought the combat right to my home station. So here's my defense against the first ever attack on home station Jameson Memorial and my first combat against endgame threat, the Thargoids.
I got too close.
Hello everyone, this is Ender and welcome to my VRcade. Elite Dangerous is probably not one of the most popular or well-known VR games. It's actually a flat game with a VR mode built in, but it's one of my favorites and one of the reasons I've been so enamored and sucked into VR. In fact, some people would take offense at me calling it a game because it's a space simulator with an incredibly realistic physics system if you ignore the fact that there's faster than light travel. And the game is a tremendous grind, both from being able to earn ships and upgrades, all the way to what you're seeing here, the privilege of being able to dock at Jameson Memorial Station, which you have to be at elite rank, which I am at trading, but not at combat or exploration, the other two areas you can become elite in, to dock at this station where you can buy any module or ship in the game, assuming you have earned the ability to do so, but rank grind's a whole nother concept. Anyhow, this station is at the heart of the bubble or civilized space, and usually a pretty safe area as long as you're in PvE mode and not PvP where gankers will sneak up on you all the time. However, that'll change this last weekend when the Thargoid alien species attacked Jameson Memorial for the first time ever, which is pretty unprecedented, and aside from ganking from other players, has been considered pretty safe territory. Fighting Thargoids requires specialized weapons and tactics, which I was reluctant to jump into because it has such a steep learning curve on top of what is already a steep learning curve for this game. Fortunately, Chris Calise, you can check out his streams on Twitch or his YouTube channel, which I'll link to down below, is an expert at Thargoid combat and taught myself and fellow rookie Thargoid fighter Utemno the very complicated and challenging method of fighting Thargoids. We also had some help from Techno Glitchy and his Shardaconda, which I'll get to later. Typically, the way combat works in Elite Dangerous is pretty straightforward. You first try to bring down the enemy shields by using energy-based weapons like laser beams, and then use kinetic, i.e. machine gun or cannon or physical-based weapons to destroy their hull and eventually destroy the ship. All of that gets turned on its head pretty much completely with Thargoids. First, at least for the way I'm playing, and there's multiple different creative strategies, you generally want to fight without a shield, which means you take damage incredibly quickly and you can't heal it or regenerate from damage like you can with a shield. It also means you have to be incredibly careful when you bump things at high velocity. Fortunately, even though Jameson was in a besieged state, you could dock in there to reload and repair. I'm not going to get into all the reasons why you should, in most cases, run shieldless because it's incredibly complicated. Another is that the Thargoids target you based on heat, and shields generate heat. You, in fact, want to keep your heat under 20%, which is astronomically low compared to regular combat where you're running 30 up to 80% where you start taking damage, and some players will even run at 150% for some other strategies that's complicated to get into. Point is, keeping yourself at 20% is very difficult when everything like boosting or turboing your engine and firing your weapons raises your heat. Fortunately, there are some ways around this. Being shieldless, as I said, helps. Also, having a thermal vent beam weapon, which you have to grind through to get access to. Fortunately, I had this on hand because I use it as part of my regular combat strategy. Will actually cool your ship down when it hits an enemy target. Conversely, if you miss your enemy target, it will raise your ship's heat. This was extra challenging for me because I had a fixed beam weapon, which means I have to be dead on with my aim, unlike gimbaled weapons, which I didn't have time to engineer, which is what you really should be running against these enemies. Also on the topic of weapons, regular weapons are ineffective against Thargoids. Previously, to get the special weapons that would actually be effective against Guardians, you had to grind through tons of boring gameplay, but the game made a compromise of sorts and allows you to get some special human engineered weapons that are effective against Thargoids, but at the weakest possible level compared to the weapons you really should have, like Gauss cannons or mod shards. But even before you can effectively target the aliens, you have to get a scan on them. And to get a scan on them, you need a special scanner, an anti-xeno scanner, which is only effective at 2 kilometers or less, which, by the way, is close enough that they can really do a lot of damage to you. Actually, all the weapons that I have to be at 2 kilometers or less, raising the skill ceiling incredibly high because you are more likely to take damage from these creatures at that range. After you get the scan in, which means flying at close range for, I think it was 30 seconds or so, then you can finally see the sub-targets. And that's where, in my case at least, having these joysticks comes in handy, because then I can use one of my hat switches to scroll to the different sub-targets or hearts. Then I can use one of my special weapons, an AX or anti-xeno missile rack, which will essentially chip away at the armor protecting the aliens' hearts. Then I can go to my anti-xeno multi-cannon weapon and finally do some damage on its hearts with this machine gun-like weapon. Once you've destroyed all the hearts, the number varies depending on how difficult of an interceptor you're fighting, the lowest rank being Cyclops, then I believe it goes Basilisk, Medusa, I might have those two mixed up, and finally Hydras, the latter of which the 4 of us couldn't even kill, and apparently it takes like 30 players or something ridiculous to kill them unless you've got some sort of massively overpowered ship. Again, commenters, I'm new to this, don't chew me out if I get something wrong here. And all of that sounds great, but I haven't gotten to how the Thargoids attack you. There's a lot of methods that are far more damaging and complicated to avoid, unlike typical fights against regular human players. They do have a typical flamethrower looking weapon, which I can usually avoid by keeping my heat at a low rate, but there's other methods they attack you with as well. They have a swarm of little creatures that come out and attack you and expel some basically acid clouds or even little aliens that will land on your hull and start eating away at it. And there's 2 ways to get rid of that acid or caustic effect. Ideally, you have a caustic heat sink, which eats up another slot where you could be having a weapon, basically burn them off that way. Alternatively, if you don't have one of those, and this is something I was doing earlier, you have to heat your ship up to, I don't know, around 150% heat, which does damage your ship. So how much damage do you want to take is one of the challenging things about defending against all these caustic creatures that it spawns on your ship, or damage that it expels when it explodes, or any of the little ships around them explode, those little scouts. Caustic damage is only one concern. It's a lot like fighting a boss fight where you have to learn their patterns, when to avoid attacks that you just can't do anything against, and when there are areas or moments of opportunity. One of those patterns that you really have to look out for is its shutdown field. Usually after you damage one of its hearts, I forget which one, and you have to get this memorized to know when to avoid them. It's supposed to give you a warning sound, but the game is bugged and doesn't. Anyways, what happens is this field comes out, and if this wave or field hits you, it fully shuts down your ship for like at least a minute, where you are completely defenseless. However, there is a possible countermeasure if you can get it in time, where you can see I'm pressing holding the gray button on my left stick, possibly you can see it, where if you hit it in time and have enough power shunted to the systems, you can neutralize that wave effect. Oh, and I forgot to mention one more thing, which is how to actually fly around these ships. I did mention that you have to be at, usually with your special weapons, 1.5 kilometers or closer. And if you are 700 kilometers or closer, the thing will hit you with lightning, which I think if you're wearing shields will even do more damage, but this lightning will effectively lock up your ship, so you can still fire, but you can't maneuver. And maneuvering is also complicated in this game. Unlike a typical atmospheric flight game or simulator where you're moving just forwards by applying, jet propulsion out the back, you have thrust in 6 directions. So up and down, forwards and backwards, and left to right, which is why I use a right stick because I'm left-handed for 6 directions of thrust. And on the left stick, you have pitch, roll, yaw, forward and backwards in my case. Side to side, I have roll, and twisting the stick gives me yaw. And maintaining a close distance against these Thargoids while not being hit and not being too close is quite a challenge. So as I said, I probably wouldn't have gotten into this except they attacked my home base, and I had some great help from from other players. Oh, and the little thing I should mention, it pays the most of any other method in the game, and collecting a lot of money in this game can be a real grind otherwise. So I hope you've enjoyed this video of my first experience fighting Thargoids. I certainly enjoyed it a lot more than I expected, and I plan to do a lot more. I do plan to get back to my How to Create VR Videos series. I have been working on it, but it's instructional and I sometimes need a break to just play, and I hope you enjoyed watching this video. Thank you so much for watching.